So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another in this series of battles which I've been doing for the past 3 weeks or so it seems now, where it's one of the maps that we've seen time and again in Reforged. It's one that always comes around sort of regular as clockwork really in the Khazad-Dum outpost. This sort of de facto stand-in for Tharbad as it's been in the game for a long time, at least as far as I've referred to it as, because it's probably the most fitting settlement for a rather large Khazad-Dum settlement on a river anyway. And also, much like the ones we've seen recently, there isn't really too much of a cohesive theme to this battle, but it is what it is. Hopefully the battle will be of high quality to counteract that, because I know that people do like a unified theme, and they tend to be a little bit, well, you know, they've voiced their displeasure in the comments, and I get it, but, you know, the quality of the battle is the most important thing, ultimately. It is also a relatively short battle considering the map. I mean, even when the map is focused on the river exclusively, it does have a tendency to be quite a long fight, even if there is no retreat back to the settlement. But on this occasion, it's, for a 5v3 like this, I assume, rather unlike the last time we saw the Khazad-Dum outpost battle, where the attackers, certainly in part anyway, were too cautious, we may see them be extremely aggressive on this occasion, which should only make the battle more interesting to behold, I think. We'll start off over here with Memento, the first of the attacking forces, who's going to be playing as the Realm of Mirkwood. So Mirkwood obviously will bring a lot of melee quality and a lot of ranged punch to this army, but obviously when they're on the attack in a 5v3 they cannot bring the numbers that you would often expect, and also their defensive values with regards to their armour are also a little bit lower, so they do have their weaknesses and drawbacks when you bring them in a 5v3 like this. So, Hiri Pain, they're obviously going to be useful for dealing damage at range, and in comparison, certainly to other Mirkwood units, their heavier units here are going to be a little bit more resilient to range firepower. Certainly these ones with the armour upgrade mitigate that even more so. Got the Hiri Lung back here. If they can get into melee later on in the battle, they could prove to be a real thorn in the side of the defenders. This is the sort of quality that the elves can bring to bear, and even though they don't have armour piercing, their base damage and their melee defence are more than enough to make up for that in terms of a damage dealing unit. We have the Blades of Emendwir, the entry-level light infantry unit for the elves. As with most elven units of this particular type, they're going to be pretty good, provided they get into melee without any sort of serious damage being done to them, because 1-to-1, while they may lack a little bit in terms of armour, again, their melee defence, their general attack values means they're going to be really efficient in melee against similar tiers of units. Obviously more elite units than them will still beat them, and the lack of armour, and they do have a shield, but it's not the biggest shield value in the world, does mean that ranged firepower is one of the ways you can mitigate the effectiveness of such a unit. Got the Hiriak. Unlike a lot of the other Mirkwood units, armour upgrade or no, the big shields that the Hiriak carry are the sort of things which can help mitigate that arrow fire damage that we've seen before. Obviously it's something that is worth repeating, because it is going to be the bane of Mirkwood's existence in this particular battle, but if they can blunt the effectiveness of the enemy skirmishers, then that is where Mirkwood will be able to do their best work. Woodland Protectors, Javelins, Elders of the Elven King, a unit of Silverthorn Arrow Archers, bodyguard tier as well, so they're going to be good in melee when it comes down to that later on. Good units for dealing damage and obviously disrupting formations as well. We also have some Ents, which can perform in much the same way as Trolls. Again, timing is going to be everything with their committal. If the line is already wavering, or if it simply isn't strong enough to withstand a big Alpha Strike, then the Ents can be utilised very well for that sort of thing, especially if you want to bust through the choke points along the river and at the entrance to the settlement. And finally the Hiriak, the line infantry unit that Mirkwood can call upon. They don't have quite as big a shield value as the Hiriak, but obviously the trade-off here is the fact that they're going to be a bit better in melee against other infantry targets. Kind of the happy middle ground, I suppose, in terms of attack and defence between the Hiri Lung and the Hiriak. So, moving on to the second army, we have Arthedain, played by Gimli, son of Gloin. He has got some standard Arthedain pikemen without the armour upgrade, but even so, pikes are always a solid investment to bring on a siege battle, because you're going to be able to utilise them in melee. They're going to be able to punch above their weight in terms of the value proposition against enemy infantry. Only problem is if you commit them too early, of course, they make a very juicy target for enemy archers, whether you're attacking or defending. Evendim Spearmen with just the first level of armour upgrade, but again, cheap and cheerful. Arthedain are very good at laying on this front line of relatively cheap pikes and certainly cheap spears, which can actually perform pretty well for their class of unit. It means you can have a decently effective army for a relatively low outlay, and that allows you to spend more money on stuff like this. Your Dunedain units, Dunedain Peacekeepers, will be very good at hacking their way through more lightly defended enemy troops, and even against better heavy infantry, they're still going to be able to do a better job than stuff like Arthedain men-at-arms would otherwise be able to. Arthedain marksmen are going to join in with the skirmishing, which will happen presumably along the river and perhaps into the settlement later on as well. Royal Court of House Armlaith are an interesting choice. I mean, they're not as good all round as the Knights of Illuminus. They are a little bit cheaper on the other hand, though. They do need to be a little bit careful, perhaps, that they don't get entangled with any enemy cavalry, which may be on hand. But the Royal Court of House Armlaith is still a very good, heavier unit of multiple HP Lancers. Civilians, they're just here to really make up the numbers. We've got the dismounted Fornost of Rhine Knights and a huge glut as well of Arthedain men-at-arms. So I do like the fact here that Gimli, son of Gloin, has decided to go for a more numbers-focused infantry approach. It will certainly help offset the fact that Mirkwood are on their team. And obviously Mirkwood are never really going to go numbers focused, and you may need to in a battle like this. If you go all 5 elite armies, the defenders will actually really like that, because it means you haven't really diversified, and the choke points will likely hold and the enemy archers will probably do the business against you. But when you can combine strengths like this, that's what will put the defenders under a lot more pressure. Then we have Mordor, played by Medexa. It's been a little while since we've seen Medexa in a battle replay like this, I believe. Anyway, Temple Guard, armor-piercing archer, very, very useful. Mordor, of course, shouldn't really lack for numbers, and it doesn't look like they will. Moran-on archers and orc javelins for some ranged presence on the front. Full line of Moran-on infantry, Uruk captains and temple executioners in the middle. Just in behind them is orc fodder, and the Blackguard Barad-dûr. Obviously, we've seen mass-pushing units like this be very effective in Reforged several times in the past. Got some Olag High here as well. I've already mentioned them in a unit type similar to that with the Ents over in Mirkwood. And an interesting little addition is the Beasts of Gorgoroth. They perform in much the same sort of role as something like the Mumakil, or even Chariots, if you're being generous in terms of definitions. However, the Beasts of Gorgoroth are even more difficult to use than the Mumakil, because they're even more fragile, and we've already mentioned several times that the Mumakil are pretty fiendishly difficult to get the most out of in terms of their cost efficiency because of how fragile they are in the current version of the game. So it's even more so the case with the Beasts of Gorgoroth. They do have something over the Mumakil though, and that is that their projectile units that they carry on their backs are javelin men, so the individual projectiles are maybe a little bit more effective. But again, it's going to be difficult to use the Beasts of Gorgoroth, but I do appreciate the fact that they are here nonetheless. We get to see them take to the field. Then we have Dark Reaper Death. That is a sensationally edgy name indeed. Playing as Gondor, he's got a huge blob of units which are going to immediately charge across the bridge, I would imagine, which is perhaps the spark which lights the fire of the attackers having to be super aggressive, this individual charging across the bridge very quickly. So if that is the case, then big thank you to him. Gondor infantry, fully upgraded. There's some Fountain Guard in there, completely unsurprisingly, of course, for Gondorians. Looks as though he's gone for pretty much the exact opposite of what Bacon Soup recently has been trying out with Gondor, which is going for a very archer-heavy build. Looks like this is far more about the infantry than anything else, which if you're going to be super aggressive, hyper-aggressive even, that is certainly the right move. Got some Citadel Guard in here, some Gondor Militia Archers offering at least some range support, so it's good that he hasn't foregone it completely. And then some Lothlorien Honour Guard in there as well. The final attacking army to round things off is the Dwarves of Khazad-Dum, so a very varied attacking force. Elves, Western men, 2 variants of Western men, Dwarves and Orcs. 4th Legion Shield Guard, a very solid unit of spears to send across first, this played by the Wound Raider. We've got some Warriors of Khazad-Dum backing them up. I mean, even though they're basic by Dwarven standards, by many other faction standards, this is a very good unit of line infantry. Just in behind we've got some Sentries of Khazad-Dum interspersed with some upgraded 3rd Legion infantry. Further in behind them we've got some Dwarven miners ready to go as well, so perhaps a bit more of a numerous approach to this Khazad-Dum push than we would otherwise be expecting. But if you're going to be hyper aggressive and march into the kill zones that are these bridges, perhaps that is for the best. Guards of Khazad-Dum are back here, an armor-piercing bodyguard unit, and the Hammers of Gundabad are also here as well, 2 units of them. Locked morale makes them a pretty difficult foe to face down. Now then, the first of the defenders, we start with Joran, who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. Playing as Cand, once again on the defence, got some Brotherhood of the Spear ready to close off these bridges perhaps. He's going to have to be pretty quick if Gondor are going to charge up and try and take that bridge quickly, because his 2 allies are down further south, so perhaps this pandemonium that will erupt will be to the attackers' great benefit. Nurad halberds are here. We've got some Nurad windblades, so they'll be looking to hunt down the Royal Court of House Amlath and also use their superior speed to do hit and runs on the enemy infantry as they cross the bridges. Brotherhood of the Shadows to throw their throwing projectiles. There are 2 units of them in a good position. The Nurad units will actually do pretty well with their armour piercing. At least they'll trade efficiently, certainly with the Gondorians, also with Khazad-Dum, although Khazad-Dum will give them an even tougher time with their quality. Stuff like the Brotherhood of the Axe will be difficult for either faction to deal with, however. Plenty of nomadic scouts, able to use their javelins as well. Nurad Storm Guard, more Brotherhood of the Axe, more javelins, this time on foot in the nomadic marauders, and yet more Brotherhood units of the sword, more of the spear, and also some Nurad footmen. So we saw Khand, of course, recently defending Khazad-Dum. Similar sort of situation here, albeit they still have plenty of Brotherhood units, maybe a little bit less so than we saw in that, but actually no, maybe not with the Brotherhood of the Shadows here in high numbers and 2 Nurad Storm Guards. So it's a pretty small army for Khand, but if they can plug up those bridges, it could be absolutely vicious for the red team to try and cross them with quality like that. Son of the Dunedain playing as Lothlorien. He's got some Loran Axemen, some Spears of the Wood and Blades of the Wood making up the first wave. Some Loran archers ready to do some serious damage to the attackers as they try to cross the river, with some Karas Galadon's Guardians here as well. Obviously a really high tier unit. Pikes is always going to be useful for the defenders, provided they can keep them safe from hard hitting enemy skirmishers. 2 Kindred of Celeborn. There's probably the Rangers hidden in here somewhere. Marchwarns of the Wood, 3 units of them. I mean, the poison projectiles could be really useful against stuff like the basic Arthedain and Gondor infantry, certainly the Orcs of Mordor. 3 units of Woodland Protectors will also be good to post up around these choke points. The biggest one, of course, is the Land Bridge. So you can see here some Watchers of the Golden Wood as well. And finally, last but not least, we have Proxima Centauri, who's playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. Some Sons of Durin, some Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers, Highborns of Erebor. When you're on the defence and you've got money to play with, going full in for the Dwarven Bodyguard units is not necessarily the worst idea in the world, but it is still a trade-off that you have to make, so you have to be sure that your lines are going to hold and you're not going to be able to engage in wave-based formations as much as you would otherwise be able to. A Ballista, posting up in the right place, could be devastating as well. Ironfoot Halberds and Pikes for the polearms that the Dwarves are going to be bringing to the field. Some upgraded Ironfoot Warriors with the Erebor Legionaries as well. Got some Axe Guard of Erebor backing them up, and then some Axe Throwers and a full lineup of crossbows, including the Blacklock Engineers. So plenty of ranged presence for the Dwarves, and considering how hard-hitting Erebor's skirmishers are, and how the enemy cannot afford to just sit there fully out of range of the crossbows in a situation like this where Erebor are defending in a siege, this could get pretty grisly for the attackers. But the attackers should still feel fairly confident. 5v3, you always start off with a natural advantage, even if you don't really have much of a plan in mind, even if you just brainlessly charge forward. That is still something that the defenders will have to try and react to accordingly, which, considering the high quality nature of even the Khandish army on this occasion, that is going to be easier said than done. But we shall see. I think we'll start off straight away without a cut, really, because I think things are going to get underway pretty quickly. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? So the last time we saw the Cardland outpost, we saw a reticence to move forward from these 2 bridges. Now, just like I said, based on the positioning of the Gondorian army, I would imagine that's not going to be the case this time, because there's no real purpose behind having your army in such a huge cluster like this, other than to quickly move forwards. Now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe he just put his army here because of convenience, but I would still somewhat doubt it. Also interesting to see, well, I am interested to see quite how well the Beasts of Gorgoroth do, considering how very often the Mumakil are killed off far too quickly, the Beasts of Gorgoroth being even more fragile versions of which. Interesting to see just how much of a beating they can take. We have seen the Mumakil be very effective in the right hands, however, so there's no reason to suspect why the Beasts of Gorgoroth may not be able to achieve something similar. Meanwhile, a little bit of room, like in the last battle we saw in on the settlement of Khazad-Dum, I should say, one of the downsides to how the defenders set up was how much room they were willing to give the attackers into the initial defending points, and in the end that did prove to be ruthlessly exploited by the attacking armies, 2 of which attacking forward very, very quickly, and the one defending army that was there that had given them a bit more room, hoping to set up a good kill zone, was ultimately swept aside pretty fast. So we shall see if that proves to be the case once again here. Again, the Dwarves of Erebor offering a very solid addition to the skill that the elves will provide down here. A little bit of support for Can wouldn't go amiss either. They do have two narrow bridges that they can try and post up on, but even still, the Gondorian and Khazad-Dum armies of the north are still likely to be a significant challenge when put together for the Candish defenders. And so far, not quite the extremely quick advance I was expecting. I mean, eventually the quick advance will come just based on the overall length of the battle overall. 5v3s rarely dip below 30k frames, so it's a sign that the attackers are going to be willing to be very, very aggressive at some point. Likely lay out the Gondorian army here now that he has scattered his units a little bit more, so we can actually see what he's got in his army as well a little bit better now. I mean, veterans of Osgiliath, pretty good. I mean, even without the armour upgrade, they're still going to be locked morale, good as line infantry when they're out of ammunition, and a solid skirmishing archer as well, so all very useful things for an attacking army, most certainly. Citadel Guard, of course, with that armour piercing going to be useful too. Plenty of armour upgrades as well, so it's good to know that he hasn't skimped on that front either. One of the best features of the Gondorian army is how cheap and how plentiful their armour upgrades can be, albeit against a force like Can, who is able to field a lot of armour piercing. That isn't as useful as it otherwise would be, but it's not the end of the world. Meanwhile, carrying out more staff masters moving backwards, perhaps waiting for one big push here, the attackers, is the only thing I can assume with the forces of Mirkwood and Arthedain moving down here to join up with Mordor. I imagine it's going to be a full-blooded assault across the river with three whole armies, which means Lothlorien and Erebor are going to need to be very well prepared. I mean, one benefit, I suppose, to the attackers not being in a lore-friendly setup whatsoever is that the three armies that are going to be over here have got very different strengths that can complement one another. Mordor, of course, with their numbers and orcs, the elves with their own set of skills in melee and their high damage at range, so they're not going to be bullied by Lothlorien on the defence in every aspect. And then you've got Arthedain, who are sort of that jack of all trades, Western Kingdoms of Men faction, with a little bit more of a focus around more defensive infantry and archers. Does make for a pretty good mix, you would have to say, going into what is primarily going to be a high quality defence between Lothlorien and Erebor, albeit they achieve it in different ways. Still Gondor not quite moving forward just yet. Meanwhile, the attacking Dwarven faction over here potentially going to be moving forward, almost like a civil war between the elder races here. A faction of elves and dwarves going up against another faction of elves and dwarves with whatever allies they could gather apart from themselves. On the face of things, I would prefer... I mean, in an even fight, I think I would prefer Mirkwood and Khazad-Dum over Lothlorien and Erebor. That's a question for a different day, I suppose. Ents moving forward, I mean, the Ents as well are going to be another useful thing, but they need to be committed at the right time, otherwise they are the sort of unit that can be burnt down pretty quickly by the high damage, high quality combinations that the elves and the dwarves can lay on. Orc fodder starting to move a little bit further forward from the Dexa now, so we may start to see the advance begin in earnest. Let's see, Iron for Warriors setting up on the front, so the dwarves taking the initial brunt makes more sense, I suppose. They've got that armour, which will be a little bit more useful. Gondor starting to make their way onto the bridge now. Not a huge rush to get across them, as the spearmen slowly make their way over. Gondor spearmen fully upgraded, I mean, they make for a solid enough infantry unit on the front line, but they won't do too well against the Candish forces. The high quality Brotherhood units will far outstrip them. And then of course the Murads with the armour piercing will also be a very efficient unit to compete against them, with the Rangers coming over to help their allies a little bit further northwards. Orc fodder are starting to move forwards, but I would highly doubt that the defenders are going to use any of their valuable ammunition on such lowly units. Although the ballista now firing. What are they going after? Is it the Ents? You know, I wouldn't go after the Ents if I were you. I mean, if you can hit them, it's great, but you're also quite unlikely to hit them. Flaming shot as well, especially, takes away a little bit of that pinpoint accuracy that the ballistae can have. So Gondor and the dwarves moving their way forwards now. Are we going to start to see any of the Candish forces open up? I think it's going to be the Brotherhood of the Shadows first and foremost, I suppose, to do some armor-piercing damage. 4th Legion Shield Gun. So again, here with the dwarves, they are leading the way with heavily armoured spearmen, just designed to get into melee and stay there long enough for the heavy hitters behind them to move forwards. Brotherhood of the Sword and Spear up on the hill, so may well be the first ones to be tested. Nomadic Scouts, Javelin Fire going to be unleashed upon the dwarves. I mean, armor-piercing projectiles are going to be, of course, very useful against both Khazad-Dum and the dwarves in a situation such as this. Actually, for the time being, half speed is probably the right thing to do, because seeing how the defenders are going to react. Are they attacking? Marchwards of the Wood are actually utilising their projectiles, not in a particularly efficient manner though. They're having to bank their shots. I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense to start shooting now because there are elven elements approaching the front line from an attacking perspective, and Mirkwood won't enjoy being under the kind of pressure that Lothlorien can deliver to them. Vice versa is also true to a certain extent, but the defenders have always got a certain edge when it comes to positioning their skirmishers and dictating the pace of that particular fight. Meanwhile, Proxima Century, I mean, this is a nice phalanx that he's got, but it's also completely exposed to Mirkwood arrow fire, which is not great for them. I mean, the Dwarven armour will help them somewhat, but not to the extent that they'll be able to mitigate all of that damage, and they need to do something about that. Any sort of shielded unit would be very, very useful. Meanwhile, so far the Brotherhood of the Shadows not choosing to reveal themselves, and the Nurads holding their ground just so. Meanwhile, Brotherhood of the Axe moving forward, charging over the crest of the hill, and with the damage the 4th Legion have already taken from the Javelins, combined with the huge AP damage that Brotherhood of the Axe can deliver, this is not going to be great for the Dwarves. So they have reinforcements following through. They do, which is good from the Womb Raider. Nurad Windblades also charging in, doing some good damage here to the non-spear units. Again, just making this Dwarven advance a little bit more broken up than it needs to be. I mean, there is a certain inevitability to the Dwarves crashing down upon the Candish defensive lines, but you do need to start picking apart the strengths that both Khazad-Dum and Gondor are going to be coming at you with. Trying to go after the Nurad Windblades, trying to catch them, but in so doing, of course, they're going to be largely turning their backs on the Brotherhood of the Axe, hastening their demise at the hands of the Candish shock infantry. More Brotherhood units just biding their time and waiting. Nomadic Scouts also. A little bit further down, civilians from Arthedain being pushed forward first. Are we seeing some shielded units get forwards? We are. Some Erebor legionaries as well, so a very solid unit of line infantry too. It's going to make it a little bit less easy for the Mirkwood archers to do their thing. Lothlorien archers, plenty of elven arrow fire now returning fire. I mean, they're going to be tearing through these Morannon archers, but I don't think the attackers will be too worried about the defenders using up their resources on a unit as basic as these Mordor archers. There's a lot of units in behind as well. I mean, it's not quite a full-blooded assault just yet, but it could escalate pretty quickly. Here in the middle, Brotherhood of the Shadows now choosing to reveal themselves. Those throwing projectiles doing some good damage here to the first wave of Gondorian infantry that has crossed the bridges. And that's going to be pretty good damage there. Fountain Guard moving across. I mean, there's a lot of Gondorian infantry that's come across. Not all of it, mind you. And I think consistently sending more units across the bridges is the right thing to do, considering that it seems like Khazad-Dum are drawing more of the attention so far. That does somewhat open the door for Gondor should they choose to. Variag Cataphracts, we saw them used to pretty good effect in the last battle. Canned in the initial stages doing quite well before being utterly overwhelmed. A good opportunity to use them here as well, because there are exposed elements of the Dwarven army and those Dwarven miners routing under the heavy charge of those Cataphracts. The Brotherhood of the Axe not taken that many losses so far and continuing to push forward into the Dwarven infantry. Those axes will continue to be a very effective weapon against the Dwarven forces. Windblades back there. Brotherhood of the Sword also now charging down from the hilltop. More of a defensive unit certainly than the Brotherhood of the Axe, but they're still high quality enough that they should do just fine against warriors of Khazad-Dum and able to inflict decent amounts of damage pretty quickly. 4th Legion Shield Guard moving across as well. The rest of the Dwarven army is on the way also. One last look down this line at half speed before we then return to full speed. We've got the Brotherhood of the Shadows moving in, looking like they are out of ammunition now, so they are going to engage with the Gondorian infantry. Not too sure about what these nomadic scouts are doing, going into the back of their own men. If they are out of ammunition and you're using them as best you can to charge in, you actually do need to hit the enemy infantry, otherwise it's not going to be very effective at all. Another unit of Brotherhood of the Shadows, nomadic marauders. So far, throwing projectiles and a more limited infantry presence is what's being used to deal with the Gondorians, but this wouldn't actually be working out so well for Khand if the Gondorians were being a little bit more urgent in getting their initial forces into melee and then sending over more reinforcements. But as it is, this is going to work out very nicely, I think, for the Khandish defenders. Meanwhile, down here in the main area, we actually do have an initial commitment of civilians, which, again, this is the sort of thing which I really do urge people not to do, because they're not going to achieve anything here. The Dwarven infantry is going to tear them limb from limb. The same would be true of the Orc fodder in behind of Medexa. Like, you're not going to gain anything here. The civilians are going to fall away without doing much of anything, and then you've lost a unit which can be used as a meat shield effectively later on. If you mix them in with more high quality units, they are then filling much more of a purpose. Whereas as it is, they're just going to be easily dealt with by this Dwarven front line. So we move back up to full speed. Hiriek and Blades of Amenduia moving forward. So the first examples of some Mirkwood infantry moving forward, but not quite in the numbers that I was expecting here from an initial assault. I think they do need to be maybe a little bit more urgent here. It was kind of the other way round the last time we saw Khazad-Dum outposts. This time it seems to be those across the bridges are moving forward with more gusto, and those attacking through the dried out riverbed section in the middle are not moving with the level of urgency that is required. Gondor Spearmen getting outnumbered. I mean, Gondor Spearmen would, under normal circumstances, be able to defeat nomadic marauders without too many issues, but pushing far beyond the confines of the Brotherhood of the Shadows and then getting overwhelmed by Nurads, it's not too surprising to see that that is the case. Those routing Gondor Spearmen actually taking most of that initial volley for the Fountain Guard, but you can see here that Gondor, I think, are starting to panic a little bit. They're moving their Fountain Guard off the front line over there. This unit of Fountain Guard is doing nicely. Khan now starting to push in on the initial Gondorian beachhead here with a little bit more of their strength. More Brotherhood of the Shadows moving in. So far, though, I mean, yeah, Gondor need more reinforcements across here. Meanwhile, what is befalling the Dwarves is somewhat similar, actually. I mean, the Dwarves have been more eager to get a lot of their units across the river quickly. This would be working out okay for the attackers if the Gondorians and Khazad-Dum were both doing this, but because Gondor are delaying a little bit more, it may give Khand the time they need to be able to do crippling damage to the Dwarves and then focus a little bit more on Gondor, because you can see a lot more of the elite units for Khand are facing off against the Dwarves, which is perhaps not too surprising. Stormguard with their glaives and their halberds going to be doing good damage here to the upgraded 3rd Legion infantry. There's actually also some elven javelins in support of Khan, so good to see that the defenders are mixing and matching a little bit. Of course, Khazad-Dum are going to be very hard to rout. Some elements of their army, like the Hammers of Gundabad, are going to be impossible to rout, in fact. Around halberds, look as though their formation is a little bit stretching a little bit beyond what it should. 3rd Legion infantry getting into melee now. Yeah, the Dwarves are struggling a little bit. I mean, this could be to the benefit of the Gondorians, but the Gondorians simply aren't pushing forward with enough at the moment to be able to take advantage of the stretched nature of the Khandish attention. It's rare that you'll see halberds charge in such a fashion, so initially that would be slightly better for the Gondor infantry actually, but as the formation settles back into its rhythm, Nurad halberd should be exactly the sort of unit which will do quite nicely against Gondor infantry. Meanwhile, are we seeing a bit more of an engagement now? I mean, yes we are. Mirkwood are moving in, but not in enough numbers again. Hiriouth, they need to be coming in with much more of their strength, and it is weird that Mirkwood are the ones actually taking the initial engagement. You would think that maybe a combination of Arthedain and Mordor would be that, and then save a little bit of overall quality for later, but that doesn't seem to be the thinking behind the initial movements of the attackers here. Some arrow fire coming from the attacking positions, but still stuff like the Iron for Axe Throw is in a good position, and I mean, it is actually a moment where utilising them isn't the worst idea, because there are Elven units on the front line. The Orc Fod are now pushing forward to try and give Mirkwood a little bit more of a meat shield, but I'm not sure how effective this is necessarily going to be. Unarmed archers still firing away. Riders of the Goldenwood, of course, going to be something to be feared. Ballista crew, I think, being hit by those Arthedain marksmen, but the ballista isn't really your main concern at this point anyway. You need to get a decent number of troops on the front line before the ballista can actually prove itself to be more of a danger. More Gondorians are now arriving, including stuff like Lothlorien Honor Guard, Axemen of Lasarnak. So if this was here initially, Khand would be under much more pressure than they have been. This should be where Gondor starts to turn up the pressure a little bit more on Khand, because this is more of a skeleton crew than the one that's fighting the dwarves in the north. Defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win this battle. Quite so, Brotherhood of the Shadows decent enough in terms of melee defense, but these are really heavy duty Gondorians that are moving forward now. The dwarves still struggling though against the sheer number of high quality Khandish units. There is a unit of Axe Guard of Erebor coming over here as well, so another unit of armour piercing infantry, which will be very much at home facing off against their dwarven brethren. Sentries of Khazad-Dum pulling backwards. Yeah, now with cavalry in behind enemy lines, this is going to be a bit of a painful experience for the dwarves. And I would imagine, I mean, Nurad Windblades, especially the Barrier Cataphracts, the heavy charges that they can inflict, this is probably going to be the end of the dwarves fairly quickly, honestly, and that will allow Khand, of course, to reposition and focus fully on the Gondorians. And the Windblades, Warriors of Khazad-Dum actually pushing through enemy lines. Nomadic scouts back there, going to try and maybe wrap around and do what damage they can. We've already heard from the announcer that Khand have taken a fair amount of losses, but this isn't too surprising. Meanwhile, you can see that gaps are starting to appear. Khand just doesn't have the infantry to hold back the Gondorians on all fronts. And that is going to prove to be a bit of a problem here, as several Axemen of Lasarnak are going to be there to take advantage of this. The Elven Horse Archers ready to do some damage, and the Nomadic Scouts also ready, not with particularly heavy charges, but they will at least slow the progress of this Gondor infantry. Citadel Guard also taking a bit of damage there. The Riders of the Goldenwood, I mean, going after Citadel Guard is actually going to be less effective than going after Axemen of Lasarnak. They may be a better unit, but the Axemen of Lasarnak will die off far more quickly and you'll be far more useful to your allies as a result. I mean, here we can see another charge coming in from the Khandish cavalry, again into Warriors of Khazad-Dum, so it hasn't worked out quite the way the Dwarves of Khazad-Dum would have wanted, but someone has to be the fall guy when you're being exceptionally aggressive like this. So the Desert Dog. I don't know if Balin's ever been to a desert. Maybe he has. Meanwhile, Riders of the Goldenwood, micro lost on them as the Axemen of the Sarnak do manage to engage them in melee. But now Khand are going to be able to reposition and go fully after the Gondorians, but they may not be able to arrive in time before their line actually does collapse under the weight of this Gondorian assault. I mean, there's plenty of high quality units in here as well. Fountain Guard, Citadel Guard, Lothlorien Honor Guard are in here somewhere. There they are. So yeah, the Gondorians potentially with a breakthrough here. But what's happening down here? I mean, most, the lion's share of the combatants on the field are actually down here. This attack is still ongoing, so it didn't fall apart. They did get reinforcements here, the attackers, to manage to keep it going, which is very important, obviously. Over here, it looks like we missed our opportunity to see the Beasts of Gorgoroth in action, which I think really says it all in terms of their overall effectiveness, doesn't it? All of them slain very, very quickly before we even had the chance to see them. So yeah, definitely diet Mumakil by nature. Meanwhile, armor-piercing arrows falling from on high onto this front line. It says defeat seems certain, interestingly enough. So the defenders being put under some pretty significant pressure now, with the Gondorians threatening to break through, this front line looking less solid than it did before, and maybe with an all-out assault here, the attackers could be victorious. The Ironfoot Axe Thrower is probably one of the main culprits behind the slaying of the Beasts of Gorgoroth. That base damage, exactly the sort of thing required to deal with such creatures. Well, around Stormguard, very Cataphract. I mean, this could yet prove to be another problem for the Gondorians as well. I think, unlike the Dwarves, the Gondorians have got enough of their polearms here that it's going to be fairly risky to utilise things like the Variag Cataphracts charging into the Gondor infantry. Even if you get a good charge off initially, they're going to get torn apart pretty quickly by stuff like Fountain Guard. Citadel Guard, I mean, there you can see poison projectiles from the March Wardens of the Wood as well, going after the Pelagia Marines, so the Gondorians definitely taking damage here. They've largely been victorious actually. Now though, they need to make a decision of what they're going to do. Are they going to try and push down and link up with their allies immediately? Or are they going to try and take on Khand and eliminate them? They've sent some units up here, or one unit up here, but if this was a token effort to save the Dwarves, it was rather ill-advised because it's not going to be effective really at all. And I mean, if I were Gondor, I'd be actually fairly tempted to try and link up directly with my allies. The longer that you stay in this position after all, there goes the Gondorian general, and that was, like I said, Variag Cataphracts charging in is risky, and that showcases it entirely. They charged right into the Fountain Guard and got torn up. But some Dwarven units over here helping to kill off the Gondorian general. I also saw Sons of Durin in there. Didn't look like too many of them, mind you, but that's to be expected. I mean, it wasn't a low quality Gondorian infantry push they were dealing with. A lot of it had armour piercing as well, so nothing too surprising about that. This is a little bit more like it, a better target for the cavalry to go after. Unprotected Pelagia Marines charged into by the Windblades and routed almost immediately. Even depleted as they are, the Variag Cataphracts are still going to be able to charge in, although you can see immediately when turning around, those Citadel Guard do prove to be a problem for the Variag Cataphracts. While down here, Riders of the Golden Wood returning to this main front line. Let's see here, Moran infantry. I mean, yeah, this is a point. The defenders, they're doing very well on the bridge fights to the north, but the more they prioritise that, the more likely it is the attacks are going to break through here in the centre. And if they do manage that, they would actually cut off the defenders from actually returning to the settlement in behind the river crossing, which would be extremely bad news for them. Blackguard of Barad-dûr on their way forward, and given the shaky nature of the defence at this point, this is very good timing by Medexa. Moving forward to try and splatter what remains of this front line. March Wardens of the Wood. And Ironfoot crossbows. I mean, all of these missiles at this point are how the defenders need to do their thing, and it's a little bit difficult to keep track of all of these missiles, but Lothlorien archers and Erebor crossbows are going to be quite capable of doing damage very quickly. That isn't going to matter if their skirmishers can be focused down in melee without anything to defend them. Olag High also in there. Northern archers are going to surge forwards. Interesting. Erebor legionaries getting overrun a little bit, but in close proximity are the Obsidian Guard. What remains of the Variag Cataphracts are now down here. I mean, Khand should be sending their cavalry down here to try and go after exposed targets, just to limit the effectiveness of this advance. Riders of the Golden Wood, well, the Sons of Durin are actually doing okay. 23 of them, a few losses, but nothing too severe. Yeah, and everything is now starting to make its way down. Khand, with some of their elite units, working to mop up what remains of the Gondorians on this side of the river. There's actually a few of them still left on the bridge, but yeah, veterans or Scylla, Thethelian Rangers. The ranged elements of the Gondor army still doing their thing from afar, but their infantry completely gone. So Khand can afford to only leave a few of their units there. Windblades are also going to go around and maybe sandwich the Gondorian archers. We shall keep an eye on that. The rest of the forces, however, the support that the elves and dwarves gave to Khand, and now the other parts of the Khand army are also going to come down here to try and help shore things up over here as things get a little bit more dicey. The Olag High is still very much alive and kicking. The difference in survivability between themselves and the beasts of Gorgoroth plain for all to see, continuing to do their thing. hammering away at the Ironfoot halberds in behind enemy lines. Still the arrow fire flows. Archwardens of the Wood. That must, I suppose, be the Candic General. Killed as he was crossing the bridge, taking direct arrow fire from the veterans of Osgiliath. That's the only thing I can assume. Windblades moving across. I mean, it's only a matter of time, surely, before they know that they're very, very quick, so there's going to be no getting away from the Field Rangers. In fact, getting off the bridge and presenting a clearer target to charge may actually be the less effective way of doing things. So yeah, this is going to be the end of the Gondorian body-piercing projectiles, a very good target for the Windblades to focus down. And the Storm Guard are depleted. The Veterans of Osgiliath are pretty high in number, but again, some rear charges would help even the odds, and Can should be able to mop up what remains of the army of the White Tree here. Guardian Marine routing towards the river. Archwardens of the Wood trying to utilise their poison arrows. I mean, certainly against Mordor and also against Arthedain, morale shocks will be pretty effective. You can morale shock the elves as well, of course, eventually. That's usually a sign that they're on the verge of outright defeat anyway, rather than anything you can exploit to full effect. Riders of the Golden Wood. I mean, you can see here though that the attackers have made a lot of inroads. It looks like the Blacklock Engineers, still with ammunition left and getting engaged in melee, is a bit of a disaster, honestly, for the defenders. This is exactly the kind of unit you need to be making full use of in order to be able to claim victory. Still a few Mordor units here. I thought that was the Blackguard then, but no, it's a unit of Uruk captains, 20 of them. Armour piercing though, useful for helping to bring down the Blacklock Engineers, and even basic Evelyn Spearmen now completely surrounding the Riders of the Golden Wood. So, like I said, as well as the defenders have done on the bridge defences, it may have come at the expense of their defence down here. And of course, last time we saw the exact opposite, and the defenders actually went on to win that game when the focus of the battle was in this area. For the attackers being a little bit more cautious down here may actually prove to be something which salvages the battle for them, but again, with Candish reinforcements on the way, not much in the way of Candish reinforcements though. You have to say, down here I think it really has been more of a case of how well skirmishers have been used, which means we'll only really know who has come out on top when we really start to see one side fall apart, because clearly the attackers utilising their Mirkwood archers, Mordor of course with their numerous skirmishers based around that one unit of armour piercing archers in the Temple Guard. Arthedain are a very archer-centric faction as well. Second unit of Blackguard of Barad-dûr coming forward. There's not much left in reserve other than a unit of heavy cavalry for Arthedain maybe. A couple of units of pikes as well, late game pikes. Will they have what it takes to bring this down? Arthedain keeping something in reserve to try and push them over the edge here, but yeah, some Candish units joining the elves and dwarves, Morannon infantry in far greater numbers. Some of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr coming forward. Now push through. Fornoster Rhine Knights are also something of good quality. What we've got going on here? Loren-armed Axemen, so some heavier elven infantry, and here pushing a little bit too far with their Arthedain men-at-arms and routing in the face of elven and dwarven resistance. Still those Kindred of Celeborn as well. I mean, 2 units of Kindred of Celeborn as well. Caras Galadon's Guardians. Highborns of Erebor. So some really high quality units that are left, and if they can do enough damage to the attackers here, then those high quality units should be enough ultimately to deal with the situation. Yeah, now Arthedain rolling forwards with their Royal Courthouse Amulet, or at least taking the long way around. They need to activate that cavalry somehow, and also those pikes are on their way forwards as well to try and help bring about victory in melee. Some Dunedain peacekeepers going after the dwarves. I mean, to be fair, this front line has never actually fully fallen apart. It's been fighting to some extent throughout the entire battle here, which, considering the pressure it's been brought under, is impressive. Blackguard of Barad-dûr scurrying forwards. Guard of Erebor are here, but yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised they're going this way. I would have thought they would have been trying to go after the Blacklock Engineers, this position being re-secured by the defenders, and having 19 Blacklocks firing into your foe is going to be pretty useful. Murad Stormguard are pursuing something. Temple Executioners, however, are just in behind them, and unsurprisingly Medexa is beelining for the Blacklocks, and Temple Executioners, armour upgrade or no, will be able to defeat Blacklocks in melee. But yeah, it's a little bit of a chaotic fight at this point, and to be fair, I'm not sure who that favours more. It's still very even in terms of the balance of power. Nurad Windblades. Whereabouts did the Royal Court of House Amlaeth go? Is that up here in the hills? Nope. Not quite sure where they went. I mean, even with some depleted Windblades, it's something that the Royal Court of House Amlaeth would rather not get tangled up in. Cavalry to cavalry combat is definitely where the Knights of Illuminus shine brighter than their fellow high tier cavalry unit from Arthedain. Watchers of the Goldenwood moving in, very high quality unit. The elves showing the Dunedain levels here. Blackguard of Barad-dûr routing, maybe not too surprising, the laser-like projectiles of the Kindred of Celeborn ripping into those Troll Slayers there. They could also do so with the pikes, but I mean this really is kind of the last roll of the dice for the attackers as they move forward here. Victory will either be theirs or they will capitulate. So it's a bit of an intriguing situation now. Royal Court of House Amlaeth, can they get into a position where they can deliver some good charges? It may prove to be quite necessary, honestly. Their Windblades. They are going to charge in here. They do actually manage to get a pretty decent charge there on the Watchers of the Goldenwood. They don't want to stay in melee with them for too long, because otherwise those Elven Curve Blades will do the business, especially if they're caught between them and a few Nurad Windblades. They will start to suffer for this pretty quickly, and they're not leaving the area quickly enough, which is the problem. I mean, there's not many Windblades left, but there's going to be enough here to the point where the relative strength of this unit is going to start to tumble fairly fast. Arthedain pikemen moving forwards. I mean, that'll be enough to finish off the Windblades, certainly, but they're in a bit of a weird formation. Not wide enough, too blocky, and of course, when it comes to late game pikes, you can scarcely do better than Karas Galadon's Guardian, so I think the defenders are going to be okay here. They've simply got the quality. They've got a ballista still. Now is when it's going to start to come back into play. They've got ranged firepower still, they've got quality, they've got the positioning. I don't think the attacks have got enough, so yeah, I think the defenders are going to go on to be victorious here. The second battle in a row on Cardland Outpost where we see the defenders claim victory. Surely it's only a matter of time before these basic Arthedain soldiers start to rout as a result of this. That, I would assume, is the Arthedain general. Doesn't look like there's much of Mirkwood left. There's a few Greenwood Rangers, a few archers, but not in the numbers that are going to be able to turn this battle around, unfortunately for them. A little bit further northward, Lothlorien Honour Guard. One-armed Axemen surging forwards as well. Only 6 Royal Court of House Amlaeth, they may as well be kept in melee at this point. I would assume that at this point the attackers can see the writing on the wall and they're just going to throw themselves into melee upon the swords of their enemies and then have done with it. Further back, Greenwood Rangers. Kindred of Celeborn are still going to be trying to use their ammunition as well. Highborns of Erebor moving in. The Blacklock Engineers were up here. A combination of the Highborns and crossbows should be enough to finally finish off the Temple Executioners. The Temple Executioners are a more damaging unit than the Highborns, but I just think in terms of numbers, actually, are there Nazgûl in here? No, that's just the Mordor General. Nazgul might have been enough to turn matters around, but it would appear not. There goes the Arthedain general. Many projectiles delivered successfully, and the loss of their general is enough to cause the mass routing of what remains of the Arthedain infantry that's fighting on the front line, and just filling their boots with a few more kills. It looks more impressive than range of fire, the split shots, but it's not actually as good. But for the spectacle of it, that's better. Mordor's general falls. Temple Executioners probably won't run. That's going to be that. I don't think there's anything left of them, so what actually does remain? I mean, yeah, it does look as though these Temple Executioners are pretty much the only thing of note that they still have left, and, you know, damn the friendly fire, I guess. We're just going to shoot in with our kindred. I want those kills, I will not allow you to have them. And it will finish them off more quickly, I suppose. Just trying to take a cursory glance around here. I guess Thranduil would already have been defeated. Yeah, the attacker's starting to admit defeat now. Yeah, 5-6%. Sounds about right for what this battle ultimately was. There was, I think, an opportunity if, again, it comes down on this map, if the attackers in the south here had been more aggressive pushing forward earlier, maybe things could have been different. Because then the reinforcements that had to be up here to help Khan deal with the pushes across the bridge would have been not able to get there in time. If Gondor had been a little bit quicker as well, maybe then Khazad-Dum's sacrifice wouldn't have been in vain. Just doesn't really matter what way around you do it, whether you take Khazad-Dum's hyper-aggressive approach or the slightly more conservative approach of the people down here on the land bridge. As long as all of the attackers do it on this battle, then you can prise the defenders off the riverbed, or riverside I should say, and then force them back into the settlement, which may be a bit of a double-edged sword. The settlement has got some nice positions, but in the last two battles the defenders have had no reason to give up the river defence because they've constantly been getting what they wanted out of it, and it's proven to be so on this occasion as well. A joint effort is what is required from the attackers. I mean, we very near, like early on the last battle on Khazad-Dum, we also saw the attackers maybe start to fall into these kind of traps, but they were able to turn it around with some decisive actions, which wasn't the case on this occasion. And so today, the defenders will take the victory. Bit of a different circumstance there as well. I mean, crossing a river is going to be difficult for an attacking army. And there we have it. There we are, 98 to 93.
Like this go to only the greatest of men.
A well-fought victory. And like I said, the defenders really just played well. Like, they've supported one another nicely. I mean, you can tell they got very similar kill counts all around, actually, which is a sign they really did share the burden in terms of damage dealing and holding the lines. And yeah, they just played well. I think the thing I would say is the attackers just needed to be singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, in order to, you know, get the victory that they needed out of this one. And that's really the difference between victory and defeat here. Not too much else to be said from that perspective. Let's see what did the damage for Khand, shall we? Yeah, the Storm Guard, not too surprising, given that they would have been the core of the defence against certainly Khazad-Dum initially, and then obviously against the Gondorians. What remained of them almost certainly perished in the fighting for the land bridge, but that doesn't really matter. They perished in it to a good cause, I suppose. Brotherhood of the Axe also, slightly less so, but then they don't have the same longevity as the Storm Guard because they don't have a second hit point, and the Storm Guard are the kind of unit anyway with their pole arms which are less likely to take damage in the first place. So it's not too surprising to see them last a little bit longer, but the Brotherhood of the Axe still doing very well against very good Khazad-Dum infantry, let's not forget. Brotherhood of the Sword and Spear getting less kills. Brotherhood of the Spear actually getting significantly less over here. The Shadows, most of these kills actually would have been from afar, so in melee they can't have done that well against the Gondorians, which is interesting to note. Nurad's doing okay though. Yeah, mostly you'd have to say the high quality infantry, and certainly the cavalry used very nicely. The cataphracts, the windblades, very nicely used as well. A lot of damage off the charge from them, considering their melee cavalry. They're very quick, of course, which means you can respond a little bit more easily than you can with the heavier cataphracts. But yeah, exactly what you want to see from your cavalry, that, and your elite units. The rest of the units mostly used as a sort of shield to slow Gondor down before the elites could then join in the fight against them as well. I imagine it's a fairly similar story with Erebor and Lothlorien, only obviously all those cavalry kills can be replaced largely with ranged unit kills from axe throwers, crossbows, archers, javelins and the like. That's what I would suggest. But yeah, irregardless of that, a big thank you to Joram for sending this one in to me, and a big thank you to the rest of the players for being a part of this battle replay as well, as my voice starts to abandon me. So I suppose that will be it for me recording for today. But yeah, another battle replay that I've got coming out. The only one that I've actually got on the backlog at this point, after recording several in a row, is one on Tol Falas. So that's the battle replay that you can expect to see shortly after this one. Moving further forward, who knows? I mean, again, hopefully by the time I go for a next recording session, I get a few more battle replays that I can do. Got a few other ideas as well that I can do, just in case that is not the case. But yeah, I mean, it is worth mentioning that the channel update may very well be a little bit sooner than the end of April, depending upon what happens, because there are a few updates that I do really need to give in terms of what's going to be happening moving forwards, because I mean, not to say that the channel's going away, but it's in a little bit more of a precarious position than I initially thought it might be by this point in the year. When I gave my last channel update, which was, I believe, the one at the turn of the year, the sort of the Christmas New Year one, where I sort of laid out my general idea for the year ahead, in which I was being maybe a little bit optimistic about what was going to be happening, at least in terms of how quickly it will be happening. And I've no doubt that it will get to that point eventually. It's just a question of how and when, and it's a matter of if the channel can survive in its current form long enough for that to actually be enacted. Yeah, that's kind of the situation I'm in. It's a little bit of a weird one. It deserves its own update, to be honest with you, which is why I'm not going into too many details here at the end of a battle replay, where many people probably don't listen to the entirety of these end splash screens anyway. They just look at the kills and then have done with it. But irregardless, yeah, it definitely deserves its own channel update. I don't know whether I'll do it in live stream form, because it's probably the sort of thing which works better as a straight up statement, and then maybe I can do a follow-up live stream after that. I think that may be the best way to do it. We'll wait and see on that one. Like I said, there's still probably, by the time this replay comes out, at least, you know, the better part of 3 to 4 weeks before that actually becomes something that is seen. Although maybe not. Maybe it would be a better idea. I'm thinking aloud here, but maybe it would be a better idea to actually do the statement update before that, sort of in early April, and then the follow-up live stream can then happen later in April when I've got a little bit of time off, and we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation, to say the least. I mean, for the time being, as long as I continue to get content, then I can continue to do it, and that's really the only thing that matters. But yeah, definitely the sort of thing to be on the lookout for. I may also return to doing top 10s to a certain extent, at least, you know, the mythical next patch, which constantly seems to be in flux, has taken long enough to the point where I think, you know, if there is something I haven't done a top 10 in, maybe I can do that, just to tide me over in that regard, because occasionally people do ask for it, and it's the sort of thing as well which can fill a gap in terms of content, because like I said, with Rise of Mordor being basically booted off ModDB, it's been sort of stymied my desire to do that, to be honest with you, because it's clear that it's now going to be far more niche than it already was. So yeah, it's, again, this has really turned into a bit of a me thinking out loud, rambling sort of thing, and no one really wants to listen to that. So regardless, like I said, Tol Falas battle replay is going to be coming up next. There might be another one on the backlog actually that I've forgotten to do as well, which goes back far enough. I think it might have been one on the Grey Havens. I've been reluctant to do that one as well, because there was talk about Horton making a Grey Havens scenario, although I think that died a death a little while ago. So if that is the case, then I'll just go back through my backlog and pick that one out again, and we can see the Grey Havens in action again. But yeah, other than that, possibly another top 10, possibly something else that I could do as well, which was kind of an idea to sort of plug gaps in content should I need to do it, which I'm sure some people would actually like. We'll see. Yeah, there's a few things that could be happening. But regardless, enough of my rambling. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.